Dus nog? Weinberg.
Good afternoon, everyone. One of the interesting questions that are raised regarding the Mishkan is what happened to it. The Jewish people were in the desert. The Mishkan built in the second year. So it's 39 years in the Midbar. And in the Midbar, we'll read in Parshas Maseh of all of the way stations that the Jewish people stopped at. So the Mishkan had to be loaded and unloaded. There are 38 of them. The Mishkan was dismantled and went with them in the wagons, and then was erected again. And then they come to Eretz Yisrael. Now, it's interesting that in Tanakh, the emphasis is always placed on the Aron HaKodesh, on the Holy Ark, and so to speak, not on the Mishkan generally. But when the Jewish people came to Eretz Yisrael, so they erected the Mishkan in Gilgal. And that became like the gathering place for the Jewish people. And the Kohanim and the Levim took care of the Mishkan. The Kohanim did the Avodah. The Levim did the Duchem. But the people, if they wanted to, they brought korbanos. So there were bomos people brought in their backyards. People had their outdoor minyan. They had their own place where they brought. And the centrality of the Mishkan was thereby diminished. And we find that with the Mishkan later from Gilgal goes to Shiloh. And it was in Shiloh for about 340 years, which is a long, long time. And the Tanakh remarks that Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, what was the great schus in his part was because of the fact that he went to Shiloh. And most of the people didn't go, because it really wasn't established in the same way as the Beis Hamikdash would be established later as being the central point because of the question of Isur Abomos. That when the Beis Hamikdash was built, then you couldn't have your own private boma, even though the Jewish people continued it throughout the Bayis Rishon. We read in last week's Haftorah about the Melech Yosh, that he got rid of all the Avodah Zarah. He did everything that he was taught by the Kohen Gadol. He was a Melech Tzaddik, but yet the Tanakh remarks are kabomos. He couldn't stop the bomos because it was so entrenched with the people. And throughout the Bayis Rishon, the Bomos continued. And no kings were ever able to eradicate it. Even the most pious kings, and even the Nevi'im, the prophets of Israel, the Bomos were there. And that weakened the centrality of the Beis Hamikdash. Because, not everybody lived in Yerushalayim, and not everybody lived near, and I need not tell you, there are practical reasons and other reasons why people, the Beis Hamikdash was weak, relatively speaking. In fact, according to most who record the stories, the second Beis Hamikdash was more successful in having the people recognize it as the central place. And in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, there weren't Bomos anymore. There was Avodah Zarah from the Greeks and the Romans, but there weren't Bomos anymore. People didn't have their own private Mizbeach in their backyard anymore. Now, in Shiloh, it was there for 340 years, so they didn't have to dismantle it. But after a period of time, it lost its status as being a portable building. They built walls, and the crushing, the boards that supported the Mishkan were inserted into these walls. And it wasn't on the ground anymore. It was a much more formidable structure. And the original artifacts were in it. And the Kohanim were the ones that were in charge. And now what happens, and that's what we see throughout the Tanakh, is that the Aron HaKodesh became the central point for the Mishkan. So much so that it doesn't even discuss the Mishkan anymore, it only discusses the Aron HaKodesh. And when Shiloh was conquered, and then the Plishtim took the Aron HaKodesh, and then they returned it. On the entire story, as it appears in the Sefer Shoftim, and then later in Shmuel, and they kept on moving. They moved to Kiryat Yearim, and they moved to Nov and to Givon. When David was bringing it up to Yerushalayim. So the question is, did they bring up the whole Mishkan, or did they bring up only the Aron Kodesh? And did they build a new Mizbeach, or was it the original Mizbeach? Did they build a new Shulchan, or was it the original Shulchan? Apparently the menorah was the menorah Shel Moshe, was the original menorah. But later on, when Shlomo HaMelech builds the Beis Hamikdash, he builds 10 menorahs. So the entire story of the Mishkan and its eventual place and faith is shrouded in mystery. Tell us what happened. Chazal tell us that the artifacts from the Bayis Rishon were taken by the Navi Yirmiyahu, and he buried them. And where they are buried, and whether they'll be revealed, so there's the Jewish legend is that in Messianic times they'll be revealed again. But we really don't know what happened to it. And in the Bayis Sheni, after 70 years, many of them were missing. The Aron Kodesh wasn't there anymore. The second Beis Hamikdash had no Aron Kodesh at all. The Luchos weren't there. So because of that, the Meforshim began to look at the Mishkan in a more symbolic fashion than in an actual fashion. Because since it's not here, and since it was buried, so then what do we learn from the Parsha of Truma? What is it telling us? We don't have the menorah, we don't have the Oron, we don't have the Mizbeach, the Shulchan. So the Chazal reinterpreted the matter for us, that we rebuild all of these artifacts of that the Mishkan had. We rebuild them in our homes and in our hearts, and to a great extent in the synagogue, as a replica and as a symbol of what they stood for. So the Mizbeach is tefillah, sacrifice. The shulchan is the table that we eat on, that becomes a holy service, and that it's lechem haponim. And the Aron Kodesh is represented by the Torah scroll. The luchos are not here, but the Torah is still here. So that was the transformation of the actual artifacts of the Mishkan into becoming symbolic. And so the symbol of the Jewish people throughout the ages has been the menorah. It remains so even today. It's the symbol of the state of Israel. And menorah represents the study of Torah, the light of Torah, the fact that it's an eternal light, it never was extinguished, never is destroyed. So all of that became symbolic, but symbolic is real also. It also is part of our existence. And because of that, therefore, all the Meforshim in this week's Parsha use every word to symbolize what is involved. Why was the Torah, why was the Oron always with half measures, 2.5, 1.5? Why is it broken? Why isn't it full? There's all sorts of perushim on that. There's perushim on everything that existed in the Mishkan, even though the Mishkan itself no longer exists, and its exact fate and where it was buried, etc., is really hidden from us. But the symbolism remains, and many times the symbolism is as important as the reality, and therefore the Parsha of Truma comes to speak to us about all of these matters, so it should affect our lives as well. Please stay warm and stay well and stay dry. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Ratzat Baruch Israel.